that's about. It is just so different from any other car I have. And it is so American. This could not be from any other country. That's the funny thing about it.
No, this is Detroit's finest hour.
Yeah. It's kind of like driving a swimming pool. That's what I feel like, you know? See how she goes. Another episode of Jay Leno's Garage. Once again, my favorite category of cars, original and unrestored. This is my 1966 Lincoln Continental. Fascinating story. I wasn't looking for one of these, but one day I got a call from an older lady, let's say. She lived in Beverly Hills. Her sister had been Marilyn Monroe's roommate back in the, I guess, 40s and 50s. She bought this car brand new. It was only 3 miles from my house. I had never seen it. She'd owned the car since 1966, probably drove it about 1,000 miles a year. Although it's got a couple little dings from supermarket carts and things like that, it looks like it's 5 or 6 years old, but it's actually, well, what is that, 1966? So there you go. It's pretty amazing. Original leather interior, original paint. It runs like it's brand new. So I just had to buy it. I went over, I looked at it, and I was astounded I had never seen the car before. And that's why I bought it. And when you have a car like this, these cars are incredibly complex. Probably one of the most complex American cars ever built. And whenever you buy a car like this, you got to find the guy. You remember the book Fahrenheit 451? I've mentioned this before. It takes place in the future when they burn all books, and there are guys that walk around, men and women, and they just memorize one book, and that's all they know, and they keep that knowledge with them. When you get a car like this, you have to find the expert. You have to find the guy they call the Lincoln Man. He's a friend of mine. His name is John Cashman. He travels literally the United States working on just this particular model. They're that complex because when they're perfect, they're unbelievable. When they're bad, they're unbelievable. And he can tell you how to get one that runs correctly. John, come on in. How are you?
Good, Jay.
Good to see
Pleasure.
you. Oh, this guy saved my life with his car. It wasn't perfect when I got it. Had a few little things, but ultimately, it wasn't a bad car, huh?
You got a winner with this one. They're only original once, and this one is what I call a real time capsule survivor.
Now tell us about your interest in these cars. So for the last, what, 38 years, that's all you've done. That's your job, right?
I have specialized in the Lincoln Continental convertibles for 38 years. They were made 1961 to 1967.
Right.
7-year spread. And they made 21,347 of them over the 7 years. As cars go, that's not much of a production. The Lincoln convertibles are a unique car. It's all one piece. It's a unibody car. Even the front end doesn't unbolt like a normal car. It's all one piece.
And once these get hit in an accident,
you got to have a body man that's a true specialist.
Right.
That knows what he's doing. This was the last production car to have lead in it. This seam right here is leaded in.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, and it's all a unibody car. They were made, the suicide door Lincolns were 61 to 69, and the four-door convertible was 61 to 67, and they're probably the most complex production car to roll out of Detroit.
Let's explain what unibody means. That means there's no chassis. Most cars up to the 60s, you had a chassis and you put a body on it, you bolted to it. If you dented it, you could straighten the chassis, but this is literally like one stamping, for lack of a...
It's one piece, and it's a very strong car. This car will weigh in at approximately 5,800 pounds.
This is the coolest feature of these cars. It's a four-door convertible, which is really just fantastic. There was a TV show here in America called The Entourage, which featured one of these, and suddenly everybody is looking for them. And I'm glad they're finally getting their due, because you would see these things in junkyards and hulks. Look like mastodons lying in the tar pits, you know, the front ends sticking up in the air and the rear end on the ground. But they're just fantastic. And I meet people all the time who get incredibly discouraged because they buy one of these and they don't have a guy like you who knows them, and they send it to people who spend their money learning how to fix it, and ultimately they do it wrong. Because you found a few things wrong with this one, didn't you?
Yes, I wouldn't make much money if all the cars I worked on were like yours here. You got a winner with this one. Most of them need a total and complete go-through that takes 10 or 15 hours to fix the complex convertible top, which is 10 relays, 5 reversing motors, and approximately 13 limit switches depending on the year of it.
We're going to show you how this top goes up and down in just a minute. It's fantastic to watch. You can bring the top up by standing on the side and putting a key in. What looks to be a key for a locking gas cap is actually what operates the top, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And the engine is 462 cubic inches. What is it, about 340 horse?
It was built at 340 horse.
Right.
The engine, they came out in 1958 with the 430 engine, and the 430 was used until 1965.
Right.
Then they bored and stroked it and called it a 462.
Right.
They got about 40 more horsepower out of it when they bored and stroked it, called it a 462 over the 430. The 4-barrel carburetor was put on the 430 in 1963. And the way the Lincolns run is the 61, 62, and 63 is the first group or the first family.
Right.
They're very similar. 61, of course, was the first with a unique front end. But then in 64, they stretched the car, giving the rear seat passengers more room. They stretched the car by 4 inches, and it all was in the back seat. And the 64 and 65 Lincolns are very similar, but they changed the dash over the 61 to 63. They went to straight glass. The 65 is probably the most popular out of the group because of the show entourage did a lot for the popularity of it. And the past 7 years has seen these cars' popularity go up like a rocket.
I like the 66 and 67 because they have the disc brakes in the front.
Disc brakes came out in 1965.
This car was probably, with 2 passengers in it, it's safe to say this car is 3 tons, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's 6,000
Yes.
pounds. And my favorite thing is they actually brag about the mileage in the manual. You'll get anywhere from 8 to 11 miles per gallon. Like, oh man, whoo, geez, please stop, you're killing me. I mean, really, baby. I mean, 11 meaning that's the best you're ever gonna do. That's going downhill fast with a hunger striker, driving naked, hitting the thing with his big toe. That's the lightest it's ever gonna be, and you're getting 11 miles per gallon. I actually, when I drive this, I watch the clock and the fuel gauge move simultaneously. They just kind of go like this. It's hilarious, but it's a wonderful driving car. It's extremely comfortable. You can literally one finger it all the way. It is the complete absence of row feel. You're just literally driving your living room sofa.
It's a sofa with a V8, and
That's right.
doubles as a motel room.
But that being said, it is a very stylish car. You know, people forget in certainly the late 50s and early 60s, a lot of cars in this were so garish. You know, Cadillac had the huge fins. This was fairly restrained, wasn't it?
It was very tastefully designed.
Yeah.
From the 50s were the garish Lincolns that were what we call the pagoda era.
Right,
They
right.
were huge. And in 1961, the car was downsized. It went to a much smaller platform. The sedans, they sold many, many, many sedans versus
Right.
the 4-door convertibles.
And they did a coupe. I almost bought a coupe. I was tempted to buy a coupe. I was looking at the coupe when I just got a call out of the blue. This lady heard that I liked older cars and would I be interested in. Okay, but you know something? Whenever I hear cars for sale in Beverly Hills, I always go look at it because they're usually owned by wealthy people who knew how to take care of a car. And if they didn't know how to take care of a car, they certainly had a garage where it was kept.
Right.
And it wasn't a car that had, you know, boxes and suitcases piled on top of it. So looking for cars in wealthy communities is probably where you're going to find the best car. That's one of the tips I always tell people. You know, if you go to a wealthy area, Palm Beach or any of that kind of stuff, Palm Springs, you're going to find these kind of cars there because older folks drive them. I'm not driving so much anymore, and they put it away. I mean, the lady stopped driving it because she had gotten up in years. And the fact that she drove it, I mean, I drive this, and I try to back up, and I mean, actually I have to put glasses on to see what is the back of this thing. It's so huge. I don't know. The fact that it has hardly any dings at all is amazing to me because this lady really wasn't much taller than this, and she drove this everywhere. It's just fascinating to me. It's very funny.
I find the highest concentration of the nicest Lincoln Continental convertibles are here in Southern California.
Yeah.
LA, San Diego, and this area is the nicest original cars.
I like the tasteful hubcaps. Those are nicely done.
Yes.
You know, it's not a big white wall. It's a subtle kind of white wall. Where do you want to start first? You want to start under the hood? You want to put the top up? Where do you want to go?
Let's talk about under the hood. Well,
Okay.
I'll go ahead and pull the lever over there. These cars all have a safety catch over here. And the reason they did that was to get you away from the highway side of the car. They wanted you over on the curb side of the car to open the hood. Now this is the 462 Powerplant. It's the first year of the C6 transmission. It's a 3-speed transmission that came out in 1966. They used that transmission up until 1979 and beyond in some trucks.
Yeah, my dad had it in a big Galaxy 7-liter. It was sort of Ford's answer to the Torque Flight. A big, powerful transmission could take all kinds of torque and all kinds of power. And as you can see from looking under the hood of this car, it has not been restored at all. You can see where there were some problems with insulation melting and a few other things.
Right, it's very original and things are basically in the right place. One of the unique features of the Lincoln Continental convertibles is the power steering pump is mounted on the front of the engine. It's crankshaft mounted, no belt like a normal car. And they used that system from the 50s up until 1969.
And something you advised me, and I quickly changed it, was to get the correct fuel pump.
Yes.
Because, well, go ahead, tell the story.
Well, back in the day when they had 100% gasoline, vapor lock wasn't as much of a problem as it is today with ethanol fuel. Ethanol fuel vapor locks much easier than 100% gas. Well, even back in the day, they had a problem with the car vapor locking because the fuel pump's at the hottest point on the engine. It's up in the top at the very hottest point of the engine, and it has a special valve in it that sends fuel back to the tank to cool the pump. So it requires that it's the proper fuel pump. A lot of people put on the incorrect pump and then they're in stop and go traffic on a 90-degree day and they wonder why the car dies and doesn't restart. And it's because of a condition called vapor lock. It's important that they have the correct 3-port fuel pump on them. There's some idiosyncrasies with the Lincolns that are like that are a detail that's pretty important.
That was one of the first things we changed. Everything else under the hood, we changed a bunch of vacuum hoses because this car has a lot of vacuum run accessories.
Yes.
And I would drive it in here. What's that hissing? It's not people hissing me, although that happens quite a bit. And then and the hoses literally, when I reach under the dash, I would grab a hose and it would literally crumple in my hand because it was on there since 1966.
Well, that's the kind of stuff that time gets.
Yeah, but that's okay. I don't mind that because I know where the hose went to. You know, so many times people modify and they block off a hose and you have no idea where it went. So we were able to replace those hoses fairly easily. The
way the Lincolns run, the 66 and 67 is the last group or the last family. And this car is completely different than the 1965 and 64 models. It has a real glass window in the convertible top, which we'll show in just a minute when we put the top up. But the whole design of the car and the running gear and everything was different than the 64 and 65 Lincolns. For drivability, the later group really has it over the earlier group with things like disc brakes. And the stronger 462 engine, the C6 transmission. They had better rust and corrosion protection in the 66 and 67 group over the earlier group. I have a very slight leak on my exhaust manifold. I hear, just only I can. If I turn the radio on, it goes away. But keep the radio on, Jay. Yeah, I need to do that. I need to put a new gasket in. Manifolds, where the exhaust manifold bolts to the head is a very common problem for it to leak exhaust gas through that area. Most of these cars need the manifold taken off, resurfaced, and redone. That was a weak area of the car. Let's close the hood. Something else I needed to call John about. When I got this car, it's got this heating and air conditioning system, which is so complex. It's kind of the same thing. It was cold, and I turned the heat on, but I wasn't getting heat out of the dash vents, just from the bottom, and then I was playing. Well, it turns out heater only works at the bottom,
air conditioner only works at the top, correct?
This was the first year that they offered automatic temperature control. Automatic temperature control was a $525 option. Beginning in 1966, it was a very complex system utilizing 3 sensors and a master control unit that's a very complex unit with vacuum valves, potentiometer. It's a complex unit. And all the 66 Lincolns were recalled when the 67 automatic temperature control system came out because it was a simpler system. We looked at the master control unit and it's had the update. What it does is it blows heat off the floor when you're calling for heat. It blows air conditioning out of the dash vents when you're calling for air conditioning, and it would sense the ambient temperature and switch automatically between heat and air conditioning to keep you as comfortable as possible, because this is a luxury car and it's all about comfort.
And that was $525, you said.
$525
and
option.
If this was Chrysler, you wanted the Hemi option. Remember the big Hemi engine, the most powerful engine produced? That was a $400 and something option. So that shows you what a high-priced car was. Just the air conditioning system was more the price of a Hemi engine in one of the Chrysler products. What else do we have? Let me get the key. Something else I think is kind of cool is you can operate the top from either the dash or from this key over here.
And that's 66 and 67 only that had the key over there. The 61 to 65 group, you had to use the switch on the dash. But this way you can open the trunk and you can stop the cycle anywhere along the cycle from either that switch or the switch on the dash.
All right, here's the fun part of these cars is we'll put the top up and let it seal and show you how it shuts. Then as we come back down, we'll start and stop along the way. You can point out some of the trouble spots. This is the most complex. The fact that this works at all is unbelievable. And the fact that it works after, what, 50 years is even more unbelievable to me. Okay, here we go. You put the key in here, like that, and you turn this.
You don't get in your trunk with a dead battery on a Lincoln. And it's a good idea to have the car running, turning the alternator, putting out power when you're working the convertible top. Because this is pulling about 45 amps of current. The hydraulics right now are pulling the equivalent of 2 tons of force to lift this heavy top frame out of the trunk and bring it up. And these top frames, it takes 2 grown men to lift them when they're on the ground off the car, because they're very, very heavy frames. It gets up, it locks in automatically, unlike a normal convertible that you reach up and unlock. The Lincoln locks in automatically, then the flap retracts and the deck lid closes. It's a series of approximately 10 relays, and it screws down, and when it clicks, it's down.
I could watch this all day. This just makes me laugh. I don't know why it does. Now something else that's kind of cool, I'm going to put the windows up to demonstrate this. Oh, I can use the bypass, can I? Yeah.
Yes, if you hold it to bypass, that powers the windows up, so to give you power. You've seen the convertible top operation, but actually the windows on this car, I think, are more complex than the convertible top.
Let's show people what we're talking about here. Now, when this window is up, if you were to get into the car, when you go to open it, press that, the window drops, so you don't.
Automatic dropping rear window. On all the 4-door convertibles, it drops approximately 4 inches when you open the door. When you shut the door, it's going to go back up. Now, just to do that, this one window is 6 relays.
Yeah.
Plus, in here is a knife switch.
Yeah.
In here is a latch actuator switch. It's a very complex system for this automatic drop and return on the rear windows. All the 4-door Lincoln convertibles did this feature. They had various engineering changes, of course, and so forth, but they had to do this because if the front glass was up, it would be tucked behind this weather strip.
Right.
And also the glass would hit the convertible top here if it didn't drop.
So when we shut it,
it automatically goes back up and it shuts off.
Good day, Mr. Bond. I mean, I just love that. I mean, but I think if you bought one of these used, you would, and that was broken, you'd just find, you'd be pulling it and you'd either damage the top or.
And it would hit right in here, it would damage the top. It needs to work.
But that's not something that you would, if you found one of these used and it didn't work, you would just think, well, it's a crappy way to build a car. You wouldn't have known that was necessarily designed in.
One time a customer called me, this was years ago, and he said, when I open the rear door, the window drops down. And he wondered what was wrong with the car.
Yeah.
And I said, well, things are working properly.
Yeah. Well, or you give the classic, they all do that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing. Hey, this is making a rattle. They all do that. That rattle was designed in, yeah. I mean, it is just so complex. And the fact that this even made it to production with all these theatrics is just amazing to me.
They had a lot of changes as they went along. These cars were all made in the Wixom assembly plant. Wixom is about 40 miles west of Detroit. It was quite a large assembly plant. It opened in 1956 for the production of the Lincoln Mark II.
Right, right. The Lincoln Mark II, and also the Continental.
Right.
Which was, now Continental in 55, 6, 7, that was a separate brand, correct?
Yes.
It was not Lincoln Continental, it was Continental, kind of like Lexus and Toyota or Acura and Honda. It was a brand a cut above, but that only lasted for a couple of years, right?
It became Lincoln Continental, I believe, with the 1961
Right.
model year, because that was a completely different direction for Lincoln Continental, the 61 model year. The Wixom assembly plant closed in 2007, and that's where all the Lincoln Continentals and the Thunderbirds were made.
This thing has so much complex electronics. Something I didn't know either until John pointed out to me. You have a bypass switch where you can put the windows up and down without the key in it.
Yes.
You know,
that gives the windows power.
Right.
If the keys are in the house and the thunderstorm's coming and you want to roll the windows up, that gives it power. That came out in 1965, and it was just another convenience option. About 1964, they started a lot more options on these cars.
Right.
They had a myriad of options by the 66, 67 model year.
well, the lady I got it from ordered almost every option except she didn't get the power side windows.
That was a $52 option.
That was 50. Who's got that kind of money?
Yeah, that was going to get the price.
But she told me that FM radio was, I believe, $75. And in 1996, she said, we didn't know if FM was going to last, and I didn't want to buy something that wasn't going to be here in a couple of years. So she just went with the straight AM, didn't want to spring for the FM option because they're one of those newfangled things. Who knows what that is? So it's just got an AM radio in it. Well, let's go around the back and we'll open this up and show people how this whole kaleidoscope of gears and again, this is before computers. It's all relays.
It's all done by limit switches. The little
Yeah.
limit switches are the brains of the operation. Each cycle of this has a limit switch to start the cycle and a limit switch to end the cycle. That's the brains of it. And then because the motors are high-draw motors, they use relays, which is basically a switch
Right.
to make it function.
Now, did this window come down when I put the top down? I didn't
No,
notice.
the windows are totally separate from the top. They don't
Okay.
know where the top is. They're totally separate from the top. The top could be totally retracted. That window would still do the automatic drop and the automatic
Well,
return.
let me go around this way. I'm going to put I'm going to put the top down, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to put this rear window down again. Put it on bypass.
It's a good idea to drop the windows slightly when you're working
Yeah.
a top up or down. The manual even said to have the car on level ground, running, and lower the windows slightly.
Now watch these screws turning. You see this? They screw into the base here.
And they're going to keep turning until it hits a limit switch over there that
Right.
tells them to shut off,
Right.
and for the flipper panel to go erect.
Then this
And
comes up.
when it gets erect, the contacts are repositioned in this upper back panel limit switch, which is basically the brain of the whole top operation,
Right.
and that tells it to unlock at the windshield.
Now, if your top stays erect for more than 4 hours, call John and he will come out and fix that for you. Okay. Now let's show. Now, when this, I don't know why this makes me laugh. I feel like I'm in the McLaren and it's the, it's the brake flap to slow you down. Watch this thing. Here you go. This goes up. It just looks like a great bird about to, okay, boom, there you go. Now, you can just see some of the myriad of switches and gears, and all these have to line up perfectly.
This is the motor that drives the cable. This is basically like a speedometer cable going
Right.
out to this auger.
And this way too.
Yes, yes. And the little limit switches, there's one here by this, this receiver
That
here.
turns the light on and off.
Yeah. There's one over there by that hydraulic cylinder. That's the deck open limit switch. This is the upper back panel limit switch. This is the brain of the whole top operation. When I bought that switch brand new from Ford, back in the day it was part number C5VY15A674C.
I thought that was the part number.
And it's the most commonly failed part on the car is
Yeah.
that switch right there. That's going to be the death of me.
Yeah.
But this being a nice original car, it hasn't been monkeyed with. A lot of amateurs that work on these cars don't know what they're doing, and they make matters
And you've got plastic hoses here, which of course over the years can deteriorate.
These hold up pretty good.
Yeah.
They're a high quality nylon hose, and unless they've been pinched, they hold up pretty good. Sometimes the cylinders leak and they get replaced with brand new ones.
And what are you running here, ATF?
Yes, this system has automatic transmission fluid doing the hydraulics. There's a hydraulic pump motor unit for the deck lid that's located in that left quarter panel area, and there's a hydraulic pump motor unit up here that works the convertible top. Two separate pumps, and that was an improvement over the 61 to 65 Lincoln that had one pump over in the right quarter panel working everything, and they directed the flow of fluid on the 61 to 65 Lincolns with a solenoid valve. They direct it to the deck system or to the top system utilizing solenoid valves. This system, I think, is a little bit of an improvement over the earlier group because it's two separate hydraulic pumps.
Were these the same guys that designed, when Ford came out, I think in '57, the retractable Fairlane? It had the roof that folded and went down.
Yes.
And that was like the first time, at least post-war. The French had one in the '50s, but it wasn't automatic. It was hand done. Were that the same guys that did
It
both?
wasn't the same designers. The theory was similar,
Right.
but that Skyliner that was made 57, 58, and 59 was a hard top, and when it retracted, it was done with a 1/2 horsepower screw motor, not hydraulics.
Oh, okay.
All the parts are different. It doesn't share any parts with this car.
Yeah.
The theory is basically the same, but that's a completely different animal. Okay. And it was a hard top, and the top retracted back in the trunk with a folding third of the top in the front that folded under. And it screwed in with augers similar to this to the windshield.
Okay,
And
let's put this, let's go through the next step here. Okay, here we go. So you notice how the glass folds down and this top comes down.
One of the things this car needed was it needed this bracket right here.
Right.
The first time I saw you, we had to replace this bracket, and that was due to lack of maintenance. This car, it's very important that maintenance is done, preventing problems down the road, and there's some things that I do that are preventative maintenance. Service points. There's a set screw that adjusts this. Of course, it never was adjusted, and it snapped this. I replaced it last time I saw Jay. But service and maintenance and fixing things before they get too out of adjustment is the key to this Lincoln
And the cool thing
convertible.
is that the top locks into those two slots.
There's 3 limit switches up there. Of course, the limit switches are the brains of it, and they tell it to go to the next cycle.
And of course, in here we have more fluid, and that's a
Back here is your pump
Right.
reservoir for the convertible top hydraulics, and down there is 8 of your total of 10 relays that work the top. 2 relays are behind the back seat,
Yeah.
and 8 are there. And the 2 behind the back seat were put there in case this didn't open, in case it, for whatever reason, malfunction, limit switch or whatever. If it doesn't open, you can remove the back seat, and there's 2 relays back here that is deck unlock.
right.
The screws and deck open, so you can send 12 volts directly to these motors by jumping the 2 relays back here in case it doesn't work, and that gets you in here to fix the problem.
Well, when you started doing this, the old boys were about the age we are now. Did someone mentor you? Was there a factory guy that passed the knowledge on to you, or did you just get all this on your own?
No, I learned most. I was always a gearhead. I didn't play with normal toys. I
Right.
played with. I went to the Army Navy surplus yards and took apart transmissions and old Army Jeeps and all kinds of old cars. And early on, back in the later '70s, I got a Lincoln sedan, '67 Lincoln sedan, and I thought that was the cat's meow.
Yeah.
And that led to a Lincoln convertible. A lot of this I learned by doing trial and error. But the best thing to learn on is a junker or a parts car, taking it apart, seeing how it's made. And back in those days, people would sometimes give me a junker for parts.
Now, what sent you to Lincoln? Because at that time, you would have been a young man. I would have thought Mustang, Corvette, something more sporty.
Everybody was doing them. Lincolns were a lost leader.
Yeah.
Not too many people were specializing in Lincolns, and I ran ads in Hemmings Motor News, Old Cars Weekly, and various car publications, and realized there weren't too many people specializing in the Lincoln, and I had pretty much all the business I could handle and a market for the parts that I was taking off parts cars back in the 80s. I parted out a lot of Lincolns. The joke is we'd send a convertible to the crusher if it had a rip seat, a dented bumper, and didn't run, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, you must feel like, oh, I should have held on to that.
I should have held on to it, but
yeah, I mean, they were so complex that there wasn't anybody who could fix them.
a lot of people were afraid of this car for years. They took one look at it. Oh, look at all this. I don't want one of them. I'm afraid of it. And also, too, another drawback, when this car was on the showroom floor, it wasn't a cheap car. It was $6,000 or $7,000 with the options that you have. And a normal car like a Impala or a Galaxy was about $2,000.
Right.
And the kind of person that bought this car wanted to take a vacation or something. Well, they don't have any trunk when the top's down.
Right,
so that was a drawback when the car was new. You could put a soft-sided tote bag or a set of golf clubs back here, but no luggage room was a drawback on it. And it had, if any of these limit switches get out of adjustment by even so much as 30 thousandths of an inch, it can cause it not to go to the next cycle, the next phase, and then you have to be kind of mechanical. Or have me on the other end of the phone telling you what to adjust and so forth. And
how often should I lubricate these points where things move?
These are pretty much, this is the flap gear drive, the assembly that flips that up and down. There's really nothing to do in here. This has had a upgraded larger motor on here. The factory put a small motor on here that was good for the 61 to 65 Lincoln that had a smaller flap. The 66 and 67 group has a much larger flap, but they didn't from the factory put a large enough motor on here, and that's why we put on this upgraded, what I call the high torque motor, to make the heavy flap go up at an acceptable speed.
You ever meet people who tried to put the top down while it was moving, like 20 miles an hour?
Well, when this was made, they had a neutral safety relay in here that prevented Joe Idiot from working his top switch when the car's in drive. The top switch didn't have power. They thought of everything, not that anybody would do that, but they thought, you know, they put a safety on there so the top switch wouldn't have power when you're in drive.
Let's continue and watch these as they screw themselves into the car. It just makes me laugh. See them turning? Now they go into these right here.
And the alignment of that is critical. If a car has been taken completely apart, it's challenging to get everything dialed in, adjusted right, get the trunk lid fitted right.
Now see, my instinct is when it gets down, just leave it. When you hear it going click, 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 that's actually okay, right? That's
fine. They made it idiot-proof. It's ratcheting.
It's ratcheting, okay. Because, you know, I would think when it starts to ratchet, oh, it's too tight, and I would...
No,
so let it go.
It's acceptable to hear it ratchet.
It fits nicely, and it's a whole different car with the top down. With the top up, it's just a big car. But with the top down, it is so airy to drive. And my favorite thing is the car has 4 ashtrays and 4 cigarette lighters, where everybody can just be smoking all the time. I mean, God forbid you have to borrow somebody else's lighter. So you got your whole, you know how you have smoking and non-smoking? No, this is all smoking sections. The whole car is a smoking section. Everybody has, and you've got these giant ashtrays. You could put literally hundreds of cigarettes in there.
4 ashtrays, 4 lighters. You had to be able to light up your Lucky Strike in the 60s.
That's right. I mean, this was the Mad Men car. You know, the TV show Mad Men about the guys in the 60s. It really was. This was just the height of luxury. And, you know, I think it's as good a car as the comparable, at least at the time, Mercedes-Benz or even Rolls-Royce, because you had features in these that Rolls hadn't even thought of yet, like this top. I mean, good heavens. And there's all kinds of room inside it. You know, you can carry everybody you know with no luggage.
6 people comfortably.
Yeah, six people, so very cool. You ready to go for a ride?
Yes.
Come on, I'll show you what we're talking about, and you'll see how quiet and smooth it is. And come on, let's give it a shot. Hop in, John. start it up.
Sound of power.
Sound of power. Now, when people look at this car, they think it's got 2 radios, but this is actually your temperature control.
Correct.
And you've got off, low, high, defog, and ice. And you don't have to go to air conditioning. If you lower the temperature, the air conditioner will kick in, correct?
Right.
And if you go higher, obviously it gets warmer.
You just select the fan speed, either low or high, and
Right.
it automatically selects heat or air conditioning depending on what the ambient temperature is.
I love the fact you have an antenna switch to bring it up, and you have an antenna switch to bring it down again. As you can see, 64,000 original miles. That's really a little over 1,000 miles a year for every year the lady had it. So
That's very, very low mileage,
very low
on
mileage,
a Lincoln
yeah.
convertible. Very low mileage. They designed the dash this way to kind of be symmetrical,
Yeah.
and to even it out.
this is what the trunk is open. You have one for the rear door is open. You have oil pressure, and you have water temperature as well.
Well, it just has a hot light.
Yeah, hot
It just
light.
has a hot light. That was kind of a, they should have had a gauge.
Right.
You've got 4 air conditioning vents in the dash
Yeah.
and ducted heat to the back seat passengers.
And your top up and down switch right here. I think we're about ready to pull away.
Lovely day for a ride in a Lincoln convertible.
We're gonna go to the country club and pick up Buffy and Kyle and go for a ride.
Sounds like a winner to me.
All kinds of power. It is just so different from any other car I have. And it is so American. This could not be from any other country. That's the funny thing about it.
No, this is Detroit's finest hour
Yeah, yeah.
when they built these.
And the Wixom plant was always a special plant, wasn't it? Did the Continental first, then this.
Well, the Wixom assembly plant was built in 1956 for the all-new Lincoln Mark II,
Right.
which was a very expensive car. It was a hand-built car, and it had a three-year run. And they built the Thunderbirds in the Wixom plant. They built the Lincolns in the Wixom plant,
Yeah.
and it closed in 2007. I toured it 3 different occasions.
Yeah.
I thought it was a very modern, state-of-the-art assembly plant, but what do I know?
Yeah.
I'm old school.
This is the very definition of cruising.
This is a cruiser if there ever was
Oh, yeah,
one.
yeah.
One of the things that impresses me on this car, Jay, is that your vacuum door locks are operational.
Oh, yeah, the vacuum door locks still work.
Yeah, they work. They lock and unlock just
Yeah.
like they should.
Yeah.
And the manual said you have to hold the door lock button down until vacuum is transferred to all 4 doors.
Oh, that's funny.
They went to electric in 1970.
And what does the star and the hood ornament signify anyway, do you know?
I'm not exactly sure. The hood ornament had points on it until 1968 and 69 model years. They didn't have a hood ornament because those points were deemed a safety hazard. That the hood ornament returned in 1970 without the points. You get a lot of lux in this car, Jay.
I know.
Everybody checks it out.
Do you buy and sell them as well?
I used to buy and sell cars. Anymore, I have all the work I can handle doing the electrics on these. The magic of this car is this complex electrical systems
Right.
that we discussed earlier, and my niche is the convertible tops and the power windows mainly. In my service truck, when I make a service call, I have all the relays, electrics, limit switches, pumps, motors, hydraulics, pretty much anything I need to go completely through those systems in a 10-hour day.
Any modern, relay types, electronic stuff that can replace the relays?
There's some modern parts that I do what I call a sex change on,
Right.
and I take a modern part and retrofit it to fit these.
Right.
Some stuff has been reproduced, a limited amount of stuff has been reproduced. And then the best thing is an organ donor parts car for a lot of stuff that isn't
Right.
available new.
This is the perfect car for Southern California, isn't it? It's hilarious.
It is wonderful to be out riding in the Lincoln convertible on this beautiful Southern California day.
Which is every day in Southern California.
That's why we're here, right?
You know, I normally hate white upholstery. And white on white is the least attractive, but for some reason it looks good on this car.
It does. It does. Me and white usually don't get along because I'm always greasy. I'm cleaned up today, of course.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. Me too.
It
It's the
shows
same
every
thing.
smudge.
But you know, the fact that this is the original upholstery, it's held up remarkably well.
It's in very good shape, and it's only original once.
Right, right. I mean, this thing literally floats down the road. It just makes me laugh. And it's really quite comfortable.
You can go over a speed bump in this car and not even feel it.
I don't know, you can run over a police car in this thing and not even feel it.
Another unique feature that came out in 1966 is that barrel speedometer that fills out as you accelerate. That came out in 1966 and it was used until 1977.
Yeah.
It's a barrel back there about maybe 2 inches in diameter that turns, and the optical corrector makes it look like it's filling out.
Right, right.
That's really a unique speedometer.
Because I remember Buick had something similar, but it would change colors the faster you went.
Right.
So if you got up to like 80, it would be red, and it had a thing called a safety minder, where you would adjust it, and when you hit a predetermined speed, it would go.
It would give you an audible warning.
Yeah, but just the most. And it says in the brochure, a boon for safety. Teaches teenagers not to speed. Yeah, right. Like you're just not going to adjust the thing to a higher speed. I was just so funny.
Now in 1967, that speedometer turned red after 70 miles an hour.
Oh, okay.
It turned red. And in one of my own personal cars, I painted it with model paint, so between 60 and 70 was yellow.
Oh,
and then
okay.
it turned red, because
Yeah.
you're usually cruising between 60 and 70, at least when you get in the country outside of LA. Around LA, you're going, what, about 15 to 25? I never felt those railroad tracks,
No.
or that bump there. Smooth as can be.
Yeah, and I'm sure the shocks in this thing are probably 30 years old at least.
They were a pretty heavy-duty hydraulic shock, and I don't hear any clunks or creaks or
No,
anything.
no. So, you know, this is a car you always want to restore to stock. You know, I meet guys that want to put an LS6 or something in it, and it doesn't make any sense.
Right. A lot of those cars that they're doing all that customization on are cars that are really parts cars that they've brought back from the dead. And, you know, it's okay. It's I work on all kinds of cars from original to highly customized. The one thing they don't think about a lot of times when they customize a car is accessibility to service it.
Right. Have you ever had a car you get out there and you went, this is beyond repair, there's nothing you can do here?
Very, very, very rarely. I could count on one hand the cars that I've passed working on in the past number of years. Most of the cars that I work on are on location. I travel to the car and fix it at somebody's home or garage or wherever. And people get me for one day, and in that one day I go through the electrical systems, the convertible tops, the power windows, and most cars I can fix in one day. If they're a real basket case, it goes into day two, but most of them I do in a day. And when I worked on this one, you didn't keep me busy very long because this was a nice survivor car.
I didn't realize the earlier ones were actually 4 inches shorter.
Yeah, they lengthened the car in 1964, and it was all in the back seat because a 61 to 63 is a little cramped in the back seat. And they wanted to give the back seat passengers more room.
Right.
In the 70s, the car got even more bloated and bigger and longer, and it went back to a body frame construction. The 60s Lincolns were, of course, the unibody construction. And
was there ever a Lincoln convertible after 67? I don't think so.
No, the last Lincoln convertible was the 1967 model year.
Right.
They made 2,276 of them in 1967, and then they were done. Ford Motor Company lost money on these cars. The Lincoln convertibles were not a profitable car for Ford Motor Company.
No, I would imagine.
But the sedans were, and the coupe came out in 1966, and that was an instant success, selling approximately 15,000 units in the 66 model year, and was successful after that.
It just looked like an enormous refrigerator washer-dryer combination going down the road when it's white like this.
And remember to leave 15 minutes extra time wherever you go in this car because of all the attention it generates and all the questions that you get asked about it, because a lot of people are unfamiliar with the Lincolns and have never seen one.
Right.
One of the best comments I ever heard was, "Wow, did you build that yourself? Is that a custom car?" And I said, "No, that's how the factory made them." It's a unique car. If they hadn't made a very complex car, I'd have had to have a normal job, but I've made a living off these for 38 years, and it's been very interesting, and it's a real treat to spend a day with you riding around in it.
You know, the only thing wrong with restoring so many cars is people do fixes on fixes. Somebody adds his own thing, and then somebody doesn't realize that the next guy gets it and think, why did they do this? And you realize none of it was that way, you know?
I tell my customers they really need an expert to work on this car, somebody that knows the car, because a mechanic that worked on Toyota in the morning and all kinds of cars isn't familiar necessarily with the complexities and the idiosyncrasies of the Lincoln convertible. Another unique feature of these cars is the hydraulic wipers. Those wipers work off the power steering fluid.
Right.
They used that system from 1961 to 1969. The sales brochure said the wipers were powerful with infinite speeds. So they were pre-intermittent. Intermittent wipers electrically came out in 1969, but these working off the power steering fluid had infinite speeds just from adjusting on the switch.
So when you got off the gas, would they hesitate?
No, they'd stay pretty even. There was a damper in there that controlled the fluid flow.
Right.
So they were pretty powerful and silent operation windshield wipers.
It's kind of like driving a swimming pool. That's what I feel like, you know?
A very smooth, comfortable ride. These Lincolns also have a weight in the corners of the car. It's a weight on an arm, and that weight is supposed to absorb any wayward vibration in the car. They wanted this as smooth as possible. In today's cars, every component is balanced.
Right.
But in these cars, they had an absorbing weight, and what it was supposed to do is absorb any road vibration in the car. I've driven cars both with and without them without any noticeable difference. So the hood ornament in a 66 is stationary. In 1967, it became spring-loaded.
Right.
And the 68 and 69 sedans didn't have any hood ornament. When it returned in 1970, it didn't have the points on it because they were deemed a safety hazard.
Right.
And a lot of safety improvements came about in the 67 model year.
Now, I noticed, like, the Thunderbird, for example, had the adjustable steering column. Was that an option on these?
It was. The 64 and 65 Lincolns had a tilt steering column, but the whole column went up and down. The whole column moved.
Right.
It was vacuum operated. It really didn't become popular until about 66.
Yeah.
And the 66 steering columns were made by General Motors.
Oh, is that
Ford
right?
purchased them from General Motors. They also purchased the headlight dimming systems. That was a Guy unit, which is a General Motors brand.
It's so funny, I never really looked at these until I looked at the one this lady had, and it just seemed to sit right. You know how cars sometimes sit, one side is down and one corner is right?
Right.
There's something, it just had poise, and I thought, well, it sits right, and I just fell in love with it. And the fact that the dash pad has not been all dried out.
This tells you right away the car was always garaged, because if this car was out in the sun for a couple years, it would have a crack right there by the radio speaker grill.
Right.
And the fact that it's uncracked tells me the car was always garaged.
Right.
Cracked dashes are a very, very common problem on these cars, especially on the 67 model year.
Yeah.
They usually crack with about 2 years of sunlight on them.
It just glides along. It just makes me laugh how smooth it is.
It's a very fun car to drive, and a nice driver car.
It is the definition of road-hugging weight.
Yes.
And the power seat. You got every conceivable up, down, forward, back.
Very, very few Lincolns had a two-way seat, although it was offered. The six-way seat was an option, but I'd say 95% of the Lincoln production got the six-way seat. And then the ultimate option was bucket seats. You could get bucket seats with a console, and each separate seat was a six-way seat. Not many cars got bucket seats. I'd say probably only about 3% of the production.
Well, like I said at the beginning of this video, when you get a car, you got to find a guy you know, or a gal, could be. But most of the time it's a guy, and they've just dedicated their lives to keeping these on the road. And John Cashman, he's my guy. He just does a wonderful job with these. You know, owning a car like this can either be the pleasure or just a complete nightmare and be very frustrating. And if you try to crimp and do it a cheap way, it's just going to cost you twice as much money. Now you have access to every single part in the electrical system of these cars, isn't that correct?
Yes, I've done this for so long. I know what they all need, and I carry. I have access to all the parts, all the relays, electrics, limit switches, hydraulic parts, whatever they need. Unless they're a total disaster, I have in stock parts for them.
You know, you take this to a normal convertible cop shop or one of these places, and they'll spend a week trying to figure it out, and you'll pay for 40 hours. You have John come do it, and however long it takes, that's how long it takes. But it won't be wasted time if done correctly. And I can't thank him enough for making this car just what could have been a nightmare, just a wonderful car. John, thank you, my friend.
Jay, it's been a real pleasure.
Oh,
it's
pleasure
been a
having
real
you
pleasure.
here. Let's see how she goes.
Mm-hmm.